Hey, Jeremy here. In today's tutorial, I'll be talking about Photoshop to provide a workspace overview of your windows and tools. In the window dropdown, which can be found at the top of your Photoshop software, we can see a variety of windows that allow us access to the tools we'll be using. The first one we can see is Arrange. This allows us to organize the windows that we have open in Photoshop. For different creative careers, you might be using a suite of tools much more than others. Photoshop has created a preset suite of tools per creative field. Under the Extensions dropdown, it provides us a link to the Adobe color themes. This is a preset color palettes that you can select depending on your need. Between 3D and tool presets, I only use maybe a third to a quarter of the options available. For this tutorial, I'm really going to get down to the essential windows that we'll be using to get the job done. Underneath Adjustments, the Adjustments windows allows us to produce adjustments on the image, specifically the color. In the flybar, which can be found at the top right of this window, we have access to all the different options to change and modify those colors. The same dropdown can be found under Image and Adjustments. We'll also be using brushes and brush presets. Brushes comes with a preset suite of brushes to use that allow you to produce different types of marks. Some of them have feathered edges, some of them have solid crisp lines around the edge, some of them are more textural, but there's always other brushes that can be downloaded into the brush window. On the flybar of the brushes window, you can see that you can produce new brush presets. You can import brushes if you happen to download some or have saved some that you want to. And in brush settings, it allows you to modify and change that brush. So for example, we could change the size of the brush, spacing if we needed to. But all of the checkboxes along the side allow you to make modifications to those brushes. We'll also be using the color window. Think of the color window as a painter's palette. Well, they'll mix custom colors to utilize in the creation of an image. There are different color models we can use to mix and create color. For example, most people are used to using the hue cube, but there's also the brightness cube, a color wheel, grayscale sliders, RGB sliders, HSB, which stands for Hue Saturation Brightness, CMYK, which a lot of people understand from the graphic design field, cyan, magenta, yellow, black. There's also LAB sliders, which is kind of like a Munsell color chart when you think of X and Y axes. But all of these different color models provide you access to create a custom color. The history window is very important. It allows you to backtrack in history to areas that you might feel like needs to get reworked in a new direction. The amount of steps that the history will save is dependent on what you do in the settings and preferences. Preferences can be modified underneath the Photoshop dropdown at the top of the software, Photoshop Preferences. We'll be coming back here a little bit later to adjust a few things to make your life a little easier. We'll be using the Layers window quite often. Think of your Layers window like a stack of stuff. What's on top of that stack is the thing that's most visible. So for example, if I turn on a layer underneath my text, it's behind the text. If I move it on top of the text, it will block out the text. So kind of think of the order of this like a stack of stuff. The Layers window also has its own flybar, which allows you to do a variety of things. You can produce a new layer from here. You can duplicate a layer. You can delete it. You can make a group of multiple layers, and then that group will exist in a folder, much like grouping objects in Illustrator. Layers so you can't modify them. You can merge them down. You can flatten them. All of the stuff you can find here, you can also find at the very top of your window, your Photoshop software, under Layers. You can find many of the same functions here. If you plan on using text in Photoshop, the paragraph window functions much like Word or InDesign, where you're able to modify the text in. Other windows that are really important is Swatches. Swatches is where you will use default swatches that are already preset, kind of like the ones that are visible now. But it also allows you to save custom swatches. So for instance, if you create a custom swatch palette, you can export your swatches for exchange and then open them maybe in Photoshop later, or you can also open those swatches in Illustrator or InDesign or really any Adobe software. These are the main windows that I use pretty regularly, as a lot of times I am editing artwork that's been scanned in, or I might be creating custom artwork directly in the software. What happens when you cannot find your tools? The options for those tools are your application frame. If you're ever lost and cannot find them, go to your window drop down. You can see what it might look like on your desktop if you don't have the application frame open or the options for the tools you'll be selecting or the tools themselves. The toolbar can be changed from single column to double column. I'm going to go through each of these areas and kind of talk about how you might customize these. The Move tool allows you to move what you're selecting on. If Auto Select at the top left is not selected, you'll have to manually go through the Layers window to select that object. I recommend on the Move tool that you select Auto Select. There's a variety of marquee tools that you might be using. This allows you to make specific selections within an artwork. You can jump between the different marquee tools to add to what you've already done. So if I hold the Shift key, I get a plus sign on my marquee tool, which allows me to make multiple individual selections that might connect together. If I hold the Option key on a Mac, it allows me to deselect areas of my selection. On a Mac, if I hit Command D, it will deselect those selections. Other tools that allow you to make selections would be the lasso tool, polygonal, and magnetic. This too can be combined with other, holding Shift, other selection marquee tools. The Magic Wand, Quick Selection, and the Object Selection tool all do very interesting things. I use the Magic Wand tool quite a bit just as well as this quick selection tool. Please note the hotkeys for each tool are on the very right of each tool that you can select. The crop tool is something I use pretty regularly. It allows you to crop your canvas down to a specific selection or size. The frame tool allows you to produce custom clipping masks, which allow you to make a shape and then drag an image into that shape. The eyedropper, the hotkey is I, allows you to make color selections based on the image that's inside your window. Underneath the eyedropper, you can also find the ruler tool. At times, this comes in really handy when you're trying to figure out what the size of something is. The spot healing tool and the spot healing brush tool come in handy when you're trying to heal together textures, or if you're doing photo editing, it gets rid of blemishes or wrinkles, or it can remove an entire object or person out of an image. The tools that we'll be using a lot to draw with will be a combination of the pencil tool and the brush tool. The clone stamp tool comes in really handy. There's a custom window just designed for that tool, which in some cases people might utilize quite often or not at all. It just depends on what you're interested in executing. What it does though, it allows you to take pixels from one image and pairs them with another. The history brush tool and the art history brush tool, what they do is when you draw over an image, it allows you to go back into the history of it to the original image. The eraser tool comes in handy in multiple cases. The hotkey for this is E. The paint bucket tool comes in really handy when you're trying to fill an entire space with a color or fill in very specific areas of a selection. The gradient tool functions very much the same way. The next tool, the blur tool, is pretty great. It allows you to take an image and just smudge it, blur it, or sharpen it depending on which one you're using. This would allow the user to deepen or soften the value in the image. There's some vector tools in Photoshop that come in handy at times. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of them because I feel like Illustrator is designed specifically for the mastery of designing vectors. However, when you feel like you need to perfect a sinuous curve or develop a graphic with precision, these vector tools will come in handy. There's also text tool, which allows you to type text in vertically, horizontally, or even just to make a selection or mask tool of that text, which allows you to input a color into it, a gradient, a fade, another photo, etc. The direct selection and path selection tool function very similarly to that in Illustrator. Same with the rectangle tool, round, rectangle, ellipse, polygon, line, and custom shape tool. The hand allows you to move the screen around if you're zoomed in really close. Now I'm zooming in using a hotkey of Command plus and Command minus, and then I'm using the hand to move it around. The hand tool can also be brought up by holding the space bar on your keyboard. So it kind of defaults back to the tool you were originally using before you used it. The magnification tool allows you to zoom in and zoom out of the artwork that you're working with. The two color swatches at the bottom of the Photoshop tools function as a foreground color and background color. The default typically is black and white, but you can also kind of change those around as needed. The three dots on the toolbar allow you to edit the toolbar and customize tools that you use regularly or don't use very often at all. To edit the toolbar in another way would be to go to Edit, Toolbar. It'll open up the same window that I had earlier. I would also like to go over how to change a few settings in Photoshop. We're going to go to Photoshop, Preferences, Workspace. Under Workspace, you can change how your windows either tab together or they don't. If you'd like to open documents as tabs, you would select this option and then close out of Photoshop to reopen for this to take place. The other area I'd like to go to is Performance. Performance is where you can save the history states in Photoshop. So if you feel like you need more or less, you can change this number here. You would also have to close out of Photoshop and reopen it for these changes to take place. Thank you.